If you're a newcomer at all to this world of databases and querying and this whole universe here, you probably have a question if you've been reading much documentation or even books about Microsoft SQL Server, and that is, what are objects? We've already talked about in a video way back at the beginning of the course called Understanding Databases, how a database is really just an organized collection of data. And the data in that database is stored and managed by various structures, various identities, whatever you want to call these things. And some of you might be thinking, well, I've looked all through the Management Studio and I haven't seen any objects. I don't see anything labeled as an object. Well, let's jump out to the Management Studio. And I want to point out to you that everything you see here actually is an object. Your database is an object. Each one of your tables is an independent object. We go down to programmability. Every one of your stored procedures are objects. And that has some pretty important ramifications for you when you begin to code. Notice tables, indexes, stored procedures, views. If you don't know what all these things are, don't worry about it. We're going to get to that. All of these things are objects. Now, an object is a programmatic structure that's used to create specific instances of the object. If you're a mad scientist programmer type, that makes sense to you. If you're not, don't worry about it. But each instance of an object has specific properties: a name, a size, security settings, and etc. Now, let's jump back out to the Management Studio. And you'll notice here that if I go into a table, like the Human Resources Department, I'll left-click and select that table, right-click on it, and go down to Properties, and you can see that this is an object that has properties. If you'll notice, it is part of a database on a particular server, and there's a user that is connected to it right now. It's part of a schema called Human Resources. It has a name called Department. This is the date it was created. We can see it's not a system object, meaning it's not part of the operation of SQL Server 2012. Here's the big one. We can go to the Permissions tab, and we can see who has permissions. Now, this is a test database, and we don't have a lot of users here, but you can do some pretty significant permissions to determine what users can take what actions on a table. So as an object, we can apply permissions to that. On storage, we can notice how large this particular table is, the index space that it's taking, how many rows are in the table, and then there's even extended properties we can get to as well. So our table is an object. We can go down here and look. Our views are objects. If we right-click on those, we can go to Properties. And so when you hear this term, notice we can do permissions on views. So when you hear this term object, database object, they're meaning some specific piece of functionality, some specific thing in the database that provides some functionality. So don't let that word confuse you, but I get a lot of questions about that in live classes, and they're saying they're talking about database objects. Are they talking about tables, views, all that sort of thing? And the answer is yes, they absolutely are. And all of those are objects. They can all have permissions. And from time to time, you're going to run into permissions issues with your queries. And just understand that when you're working with objects like this, every one of those objects has permissions that you're going to have to satisfy in some instances before you can query that data or update that data or add or delete data.